The bridge of the salvage and exploration vessel Tusker was an olfactory museum of past emergencies and enduring human stubbornness. The faint metallic tang of ozone from a near-miss capacitor blowout 3 cycles ago mingled with the robust aroma of Kalen Ram Varga's perpetually brewing calf, a concoction so potent it could strip paint. Adding to the miasma was the underlying scent of recycled air, lubricants, and the faint, almost imperceptible musk of a crew that worked hard and rarely saw the inside of a pristine starbase's environmental systems. The ship itself, a heavily modified Karen-class hauler, bore the scars of a dozen too-close encounters with asteroids, pirates, and phenomena best left undocumented. Its hull was a patchwork of welded plates, aftermarket thruster units, and sensor arrays that looked like they'd been bolted on as an afterthought, which in many cases they had. Captain Varga, a woman whose stocky build and perpetually furrowed brow gave her the look of a predator sizing up its next meal, leaned back in her command chair. The ancient synth leather groaned in protest. "Anything on the long-range Pathfinder?" Jorick Pathfinder Gage, the Tusker's pilot and navigator, ran a hand through his already disheveled shock of sandy hair. His console was a chaotic symphony of blinking lights and jury-rigged bypasses, a testament to his ability to make outdated tech perform miracles. "Just the usual void static and the faint, mournful sigh of our bank account, Captain. We're still a good 3 days from the Denna. Trade route pickings are slim out here." "Slim is our specialty," Varga grunted, taking a loud sip of her calf. "Sparkplug, how are those new thermal regulators holding up? Don't want another repeat of the Krill Nebula incident. Smelled like singed womprat for a week." In the engineering pit nestled amidst exposed conduits and glowing diagnostic screens, Brenna Sparkplug Helios grunted without looking up. Her goggles were pushed up onto her forehead, revealing grease-smudged cheeks and eyes that burned with an intense, almost feverish focus. "They're holding, Ram. Barely. Like everything else on this flying heap of aspirations, they require constant prayer and percussive maintenance. But they'll get us where we're going, assuming where we're going doesn't involve anything hotter than a poorly insulated fusion core." Varga allowed herself a grim smile. This was her crew. Pathfinder, who could navigate an asteroid field blindfolded with one hand tied behind his back, while humming off-key sea shanties. Sparkplug, an engineering prodigy who could coax miracles from scrap metal and sheer willpower. And herself, Ram Varga, who'd earned her call sign by being as subtle and yielding as a charging herbivore with a vendetta. They were, in the eyes of the wider galactic concordiat liabilities, humans, loud, unpredictable, prone to unorthodox solutions, and generally considered the galactic equivalent of heavily armed, surprisingly resilient, and occasionally brilliant space orcs. They got the jobs no one else wanted, the ones that were too dangerous, too dirty, or too far beneath the dignity of the more refined species. A sudden, insistent chirp from the primary comms unit cut through the bridge chatter. Pathfinder frowned. "Incoming transmission. Encrypted. Concordiat military band. That's new." Varga straightened. On screen. The main view screen flickered, replacing the star-dusted void with the stern, meticulously groomed face of a Xylosian official, his rigid facial tendrils quivering with barely suppressed impatience. His uniform was immaculate, a stark contrast to the Tusker's lived-in aesthetic. "Captain Kalen Varga of the independent freighter Tusker?" His voice was crisp, clipped, like breaking icicles. "Speaking," Varga said, her tone carefully neutral. "To what do we owe the honor, Commander?" "Coordinator Driscoll, Galactic Concordiat Special Operations," the Xylosian corrected, his gaze sweeping dismissively across the visible portion of the Tusker's bridge. "You are hereby requisitioned under Emergency Mandate 734 for immediate deployment. Your vessel and crew are to rendezvous with Task Force Sigma 9 at galactic coordinates 773 Alpha by 91. You will receive your briefing en route." Sparkplug's voice crackled over the internal comms. "Requisitioned? They can't just—" "They can, Sparky, and they are." Varga cut her off, her eyes narrowed on Driscoll. "Special ops, you say? Sounds above our usual pay grade, or below it, depending on how messy it is." Driscoll's tendrils twitched again. The mission is of critical importance, Captain. Aethelgard research post in the Nyxian Veil Nebula has gone silent. All contact was lost 72 standard hours ago. The nature of their research was sensitive. Pathfinder let out a low whistle. The Nyxian Veil? That's bad space coordinator. Navigational nightmare, full of gravitic distortions and energy phantoms. Most ships give it a wide berth. Precisely why a vessel with your unique operational history and resilience has been included, Driscoll said, the faintest hint of disdain lacing his tone. You are to proceed to the rendezvous, point with all haste. You will be joining the Glypsian science vessel Lumina, under the command of Emissary Valerius, and the Valkor warship Steel Talon, commanded by Commander Borok. They are already en route. Varga's eyebrows shot up. The Glypsians were known for their delicate sensibilities and reliance on hyper-advanced, often temperamental technology. The Valkor were a militaristic, honor-bound species who viewed most others, especially humans, with barely concealed contempt. An eclectic welcoming. Committee, are we the bait coordinator or the disposable vanguard? Driscoll's expression didn't change. Your role will be clarified in the full briefing, Captain. Suffice it to say, your reputation for navigating hazardous environments and achieving objectives through unconventional means precedes you. Do not disappoint. Driscoll out. The screen went blank, leaving Varga staring at the lingering image of the Xylossian's disdainful face. Well? Pathfinder said, breaking the silence. That was an unsolicited offer of adventure and probable doom. Sparkplug emerged from the engineering pit, wiping her hands on an already stained rag. Aethelgard post. I've heard whispers. High-energy particle physics, some fringe temporal mechanics, stuff that makes sensible engineers nervous. Her eyes, however, held a spark of keen interest. The Nyxian Veil, though, that's going to be hell on the systems, especially the delicate Glypsian tech, and the Valkor won't appreciate their precision targeting going haywire. Varga stood, stretching her arms above her head. So, a silent research station in a bad neighborhood, partnered with a species that thinks we're charmingly primitive, and another that probably considers us a galactic blight. And the Concordiat thinks we're the ones for the job. She grinned, a flash of teeth that was more predatory than amused. Sounds like they're desperate, or they've run out of sensible options. Probably both, Ram, Pathfinder said, already, coaxing new life into the navigation console. Course laid in for the rendezvous, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Sparkplug, give the old girl a thorough once-over. Reinforce anything that looks like it might rattle loose. And then reinforce it again. I want the Tusker mean and ugly but holding together, Varga ordered. Pathfinder, find us the quickest, dirtiest route that won't shake us apart before we even get there. Aye, Captain, they chorused. Varga strapped herself back into her chair, her mind already racing. The Nyxian Veil, Aethelgard, Glypsians, and Valkor. This wasn't their usual salvage run. This smelled of real trouble, the kind that could swallow ships whole and leave no trace. And for some reason, the Galactic Concordiat thought the space orcs on the Tusker were the ones to send into the maw. All right, you glorified rust bucket, she muttered, patting the armrest of her chair. Let's go show them what a little human ingenuity and a whole lot of stubbornness can do. The Tusker, with a shudder and a groan that resonated deep in Varga's bones, began to turn towards its new, unwanted destination. The rendezvous point was a desolate patch of space, marked only by the cold, distant glitter of far-off galaxies. The Lumina, the Glypsian science vessel, was the first to arrive after the Tusker. It was a thing of breathtaking elegance, its hull a seamless, pearlescent curve that seemed to ripple with internal light. It moved with a silent grace that made the Tusker look even more like a brutalist sculpture assembled from a scrapyard. Emissary Valerius, his voice a series of soft, melodic chimes translated into galactic standard by his ship's AI, hailed them. Vessel Tusker, you are surprisingly punctual. I am Emissary Valerius. We await the arrival of the Valkor. His image on the Tusker's main screen was that of a tall, willowy being, encased in an environmental suit that shimmered with complex energy patterns. His large dark eyes blinked slowly, conveying a sense of immense patience or perhaps profound boredom. "Emissary," Varga replied, keeping her tone even. "Captain Varga, we try not to keep our dance partners waiting, especially when the music is about to get ugly." Valerius's only visible reaction was a subtle dimming of his suit's ambient glow. "A curious turn of phrase, Captain. The Valkor are approaching." Moments later, the steel talon warped into existence, a brutal counterpoint to the Lumina's artistry. The Valkor warship was a wedge of gunmetal gray, bristling with weapon emplacements and thick armor plating. It radiated an aura of disciplined menace. Commander Borak, a hulking Valkor with a scarred chitinous face and mandibles that clicked audibly, appeared on screen. His voice was a deep, guttural rumble. "Task Force Sigma 9 assembled." Borak grunted, his eyes small and black beneath heavy brow ridges flicking dismissively over the image of the Tusker, the human vessel, as anticipated. The implication was clear. They had anticipated something unimpressive. The briefing, delivered via a secure multi-ship channel by Coordinator Driscoll's disembodied voice, was concise and grim. Aethelgard Research Post, a joint human-Glyptian venture, though the Glyptians had provided the primary funding and oversight, had been studying exotic energy phenomena within the Nyxian Veil. Its last automated diagnostic burst had been garbled, followed by total silence. The mission: ascertain the station's status, rescue any survivors, and determine the cause of the silence. If hostile action was involved, they were to assess the threat. "The Nyxian Veil is treacherous," Driscoll's voice intoned. "The Lumina will take the lead, its advanced sensor suite best equipped for navigating the nebula's anomalies. The Steel Talon will provide escort. The Tusker will follow and provide support as deemed necessary by Emissary Valerius or Commander Borak." Varga bit back a sarcastic remark. Support was a euphemism for stay out of the way unless something needs hitting or hauling. "Understood, Coordinator," Valerius chimed. Borak gave a curt nod. Varga simply said, "Acknowledged." The flotilla, if 3 such disparate ships could be called that, turned towards the swirling, ominous clouds of the Nyxian Veil. It was a maelstrom of cosmic dust, ionized gas, and unstable gravitic tides, painted in hues of violent purple, sickly green, and blood red. As they plunged into its depths, the universe outside vanished, replaced by an oppressive claustrophobic beauty. Almost immediately, the Lumina's smooth progress became slightly more hesitant. Valerius's melodic voice reported, "Minor gravitic shearing, captains. Compensating. Sensor acuity is intermittently compromised by localized tachyon interference." On the Steel Talon, Borak's guttural commands to his crew could be faintly overheard, indicating their own systems were struggling to maintain a clear operational picture. "Helm, maintain formation. Gunnery, recalibrate targeting sensors. Interference levels are spiking." Aboard the Tusker, things were, ironically, smoother. "How we looking, Pathfinder?" Varga asked. Gage wrestled briefly with his controls as a particularly violent shudder ran through the deck plates. "She's bucking like a Danubian sand mule, Captain, but the old girl's taking it. These older nav systems don't rely so much on those fancy high-frequency subspace scanners the Glyptians love. Too much noise for them. We're practically flying by feel and dead reckoning here with a bit of gravitic wave surfing thrown in for spice." Sparkplug, her face illuminated by the flickering readouts in her engineering pit, added, "The energy shielding is holding, surprisingly. Those repurposed asteroid cracker field emitters we installed last year are earning their keep. They're designed to handle chaotic EM bursts. This nebula is just a bigger, angrier asteroid field, electromagnetically speaking." She paused. "Getting some very weird energy signatures, though. Background radiation is off the charts, but there are pockets, like something is actively stirring the pot." As they ventured deeper, the nebula's interference intensified. The Lumina had to reduce speed. its sophisticated system struggling against the electronic cacophony. The steel talon maintained its grim patrol, but its movements were becoming increasingly rigid, its turrets twitching nervously as false sensor ghosts flickered in and out of existence. And then, Aethelgard research post appeared on their screens, a ghost emerging from the roiling mists. It was a sprawling, multi-armed structure, clearly of Glyptian design but with visibly human-engineered additions, robust, almost brutalist modules bolted onto the more elegant framework. It was intact, but utterly dark. No running lights, no communication signals, no energy signatures that spoke of a functioning station. An oppressive silence emanated from it, a silence that felt more profound than the mere absence of sound. Valerius's chimes held a note of unease. Aethelgard Station. Preliminary scans show nothing. No life signs, no active power cores. There are anomalous localized energy fluctuations surrounding the station, however, highly unstable, and unlike anything in our databanks. Borok's voice rumbled. Prepare a full sensor sweep. Steel Talon will maintain a defensive perimeter. A high-resolution image of the station filled the Tusker's view screen. Varga leaned forward, her eyes scanning the silent structure. Sparkplug, what do your instruments make of those fluctuations? They're phasing, Captain, Brenna replied, her voice tight with concentration, like they're not entirely in our dimension, or cycling through different states of matter. Very low energy overall, but the signature is jagged, unnatural. As if on cue, the Lumina launched a sleek silver drone towards Aethelgard for a close-range scan. It moved swiftly, its sensor arrays glowing. Then, as it neared one of the shimmering, almost invisible distortions near the station's central spire, the drone suddenly convulsed. Its lights flickered erratically, and its image on the tactical display seemed to blur, to become translucent, for a horrifying instant. Then, its signal vanished. Drone unresponsive. A Glyptian technician's voice called out urgently from the Lumina's bridge. Signal lost. Last telemetry indicated partial molecular decohesion. Before anyone could fully process this, Commander Borok, his patience clearly exhausted, barked. Hostile entity confirmed. Steel Talon, target the distortion, fire warning shot, Sector Gamma 7. A beam of incandescent energy lanced out from the Valkor warship, aimed at the area where the drone had vanished. But instead of an impact, the beam passed directly through a shimmering, translucent field that momentarily solidified in its path, then vanished again, as if it were never there. The energy dissipated harmlessly into the nebula beyond. Valerius's chimes were sharp with alarm. Commander Borok, your actions are precipitous. We do not understand the nature of this phenomenon. Borok's mandibles clicked angrily. It disabled your drone, emissary. That is an act of aggression in any language. Standard Valkor doctrine dictates a commensurate response. Varga watched the exchange, her knuckles white where she gripped the armrests of her chair. A drone that phased out of existence, energy weapons that passed through thin air. This was no ordinary hostile encounter. Pathfinder, get us a little closer, she said, her voice low and steady. Not too close. Sparkplug, keep those sensors focused. If their fancy tech can't get a lock, maybe our crude methods can pick up something they're filtering out. The other two ships were still debating protocols and analyzing sensor echoes that told them nothing concrete. Varga had a sinking feeling that whatever was waiting for them at Aethelgard research post wasn't going to play by anyone's rules, least of all the carefully crafted doctrines of the galactic Concordiat's finest. And the space orcs on the Tusker might be the only ones willing to get their hands dirty enough to find out why. Taking us in, Captain, Pathfinder acknowledged, his hands moving with practiced ease over the worn controls. The Tusker grumbled, its ascent, thrusters firing in short, controlled bursts as it edged closer to the silent, dark bulk of Aethelgard Station. The shimmering distortions around it seemed to ripple, like heat haze over a desert plain, but with an unsettling, non-Euclidean quality. Hold at 10 kilometers, Pathfinder, Varga ordered. Sparkplug, what are you seeing now we're tickling its toes? Brenna Helios leaned intently towards her main diagnostic screen, her brow furrowed. The phasing effect is definitely localized around those crystalline structures. They're barely visible to the naked eye like flawed glass, but they're generating the fields. And the energy pulses, they're not attacks, not in the conventional sense, more like byproducts of their state of existence. Suddenly, one of the shimmering fields near the Tusker pulsed, a silent wave of energy washing over them. The lights on the bridge flickered violently. Varga felt a strange, tingling sensation crawl across her skin, like static electricity, followed by a wave of profound disorientation that made the deck beneath her feet seem to tilt and sway. Her own hand, resting on the console, appeared to momentarily blur at the edges. "Report," Varga snapped, shaking her head to clear the lingering dizziness. "Localized phasing event, portside hull, section Gamma 9. Pathfinder grunted, his knuckles white on the yoke. "Minor system flickers across the board, compensating. It felt like the ship stretched for a second." "I felt it too," Sparkplug said, her voice tight. "My teeth are still buzzing. Inertial dampeners went haywire for a microsecond, but look at this." She pointed to a complex waveform scrolling across her monitor. During that pulse, the background energy in the immediate vicinity of the affected hull section dropped to almost zero, then spiked erratically before the crystals rephased. It's like they're feeding on ambient energy to maintain their trans-dimensional state, and when they interact with something dense like our hull, it causes a feedback loop. The human crew, unlike their more delicate or rigidly disciplined counterparts, didn't panic. They were used to things going sideways. Varga had once piloted the Tusker through a collapsing magnetic tunnel with half her navigational sensors offline and an engine on fire. Pathfinder had landed the ship on a rogue moon with gravity fluctuations that would have turned most pilots inside out. Sparkplug routinely performed engineering miracles that defied known physics, often while under fire. This unsettling, reality-bending phenomenon was just another Tuesday. Meanwhile, aboard the Steel Talon, Commander Borak was losing patience. "Emissary Valerius, your analytical approach yields no results. These entities, whatever they are, pose a clear and present danger. We must ascertain their offensive capabilities." Before Valerius could offer a melodic protest, Borak barked, "Gunnery, target the largest crystalline concentration. Fire a full salvo of kinetic penetrators." A volley of heavy armor-piercing slugs, designed to punch through fortified warship hulls, erupted from the Steel Talon. They sped towards a particularly dense cluster of shimmering distortions near Aethelgard's primary docking arm. But as they entered the phasing field, a bizarre spectacle unfolded. Some of the projectiles simply vanished, as if swallowed by an invisible void. Others passed straight through the area where the crystals had been visible, continuing harmlessly into space. One, however, seemed to strike something momentarily solid. There was no explosion, no debris, but the projectile abruptly halted its trajectory and then, impossibly, folded in on itself before winking out of existence. Borak's guttural exclamation was one of pure disbelief. "By the sacred iron of Kor, what sorcery is this?" On the Lumina, Emissary Valerius began a complex transmission sequence, broadcasting a cascade of mathematical proofs, harmonic frequencies, and pictograms representing the fundamental forces of the universe. "I am attempting to establish a communication baseline," his chimes explained. "If these entities possess intelligence, they may recognize patterns of sentient thought." The phasic crystalline swarm, or PCS as Sparkplug was now mentally labeling them, offered no reply. The shimmering fields continued their silent, unsettling dance. Varga watched, a grim understanding dawning. "They're not listening, Valerius. And they're not impressed by your big guns, Borak." She turned to her engineer. "Sparkplug, you said the energy drops before they phase, then spikes, and that microasteroid impacts in the nebula seem to affect them, however briefly." "Yes, Captain," Brenna affirmed, her eyes gleaming with an almost feral intensity as she cross-referenced data streams. "The energy signature just before a crystal actively phases is unique. A very high-frequency, incredibly short burst. It's like a key turning in a lock. And the kinetic impacts, if they happen to hit a crystal while it's in a more tangible state, cause a momentary desynchronization. They flicker, lose cohesion for a split second. Standard energy weapons are useless because they can simply shift phase to avoid the energy. Kinetic impact is too slow and unpredictable against something that can become intangible at will. So, they're not invulnerable. Varga mused. Just very, very good at not being where you hit them. She looked at the dark station. We need to know what happened in there. Why Aethelgard went silent. And whatever it is, I doubt we'll find the answer by chucking rocks at it from a distance or singing it lullabies. Pathfinder, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. So what's the plan, Ram? A frontal assault with harsh language and confusing maneuvers. Varga's lips curved into a humorless smile. Something like that. Valerius, Borok. She broadcast her voice, cutting through their continuing, fruitless debate. Your methods aren't working. We're going to try something a little more direct. We need to get inside that station. A wave of horrified chimes came from Valerius. Captain Varga, that is unacceptably reckless. We have no understanding of the dangers within. Borok's rumble was laced with grudging curiosity. Boarding action? Against an enemy whose nature we cannot comprehend? A bold strategy, human, or a foolish one? Maybe both, Varga said. But sitting out here waiting for it to make the first move isn't getting us anywhere. Tusker is going to attempt to dock. If those things react, at least we'll get some new data. Sparkplug was already nodding. If we can get close enough to analyze their phasing cycle during a direct interaction with the station's hull, or even our own docking clamps, I might be able to isolate the trigger frequency. This was the human way. When faced with the unknown, poke it with a stick. A very large, heavily armored, and surprisingly adaptable stick. The space orc approach, less about finesse, more about direct, often messy interaction. And sometimes in a galaxy full of beings too cautious or too reliant on perfect data, that was exactly what was needed to break a deadlock. Prepare for Eva. Helios, you're with me. Gage, keep the Tusker steady and be ready for a fast peel-out if things go sideways. And I mean really sideways. Captain Varga's voice was clipped, businesslike as she surveyed the readouts from their close range. Scan of Aethelgard's main airlock. The phasic crystalline swarm still shimmered around the station, but there seemed to be a slightly less dense patch near the primary docking ring, as if the station's bulk offered some minor shielding. Boarding the station is a statistically unjustifiable risk, Captain Varga. Emissary Valerius's chimes protested over the comms, a distinct note of agitation in their melody. The potential for personnel loss outweighs the speculative intelligence gain. Commander Borok's guttural voice added, If these entities can make drones and kinetic rounds vanish, they can do the same to your boarding party. Valcor honor dictates we face a known enemy, not stumble blindly into a trap. With all due respect, Emissary Commander, Varga replied, already shrugging into her heavy-duty EVA suit. Sitting out here theorizing while those researchers might still be alive, or worse, well, whatever got them is figuring out how to spread isn't an option I'm comfortable with. We go in, we find out what happened, we get out. Simple, messy, human. Sparkplug, her own suit already sealed, gave a thumbs up. Her eyes, visible through her visor, were bright with a mixture of apprehension and fierce curiosity. The station's external hatches are unresponsive, Captain. We'll have to cut our way in. I've brought the persuader. She patted a bulky plasma cutter attached to her tool belt. They chose a secondary maintenance airlock on one of Aethelgard's more robust, human-designed modules. The Gliptian sections were too smooth, too seamless for a forced entry without causing catastrophic damage. As Gage expertly maneuvered the Tusker to within meters of the station hull, tether lines were fired, magnetically clamping onto the cold metal. The proximity of the station seemed to agitate the nearby PCS, causing faint, visible ripples in space and a fresh wave of disorienting sensations that even the Tusker's internal dampeners couldn't fully negate. Hard tether established, Gage reported, his voice tight. Good luck, Ram Sparky, don't take any wooden quintars. The boarding ramp extended, and Varga and Helios stepped out onto the silent, freezing hull of Aethelgard Research Post. The Nyxian Veil swirled around them, a breathtaking but malevolent backdrop. They moved cautiously, magnetic boots clinging to the metal, safety tethers trailing back to the Tusker. The plasma cutter whined, then bit into the airlock door with a shower of incandescent sparks. Inside, the station was a tomb. Emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was frigid, the life support clearly offline for days. What was truly unsettling was the state of the equipment and structures. Consoles were not merely broken, but seemed to have sagged, sections of them appearing translucent or slightly out of alignment with the rest of the room, as if reality itself had become unreliable. In one corridor, a medical gurney was partially embedded in a bulkhead, not through impact, but as if the two objects had tried to occupy the same space and partially succeeded. There were no bodies. Not a single sign of the station's crew, living or dead. Only this pervasive, chilling sense of wrongness. Spooky, Helios muttered, her breath misting inside her helmet. She ran a handheld scanner over a distorted control panel. These phase distortions are embedded in the very structure. Whatever happened, it was intimate and pervasive. They moved deeper, following station schematics downloaded from the Concordiat briefing. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of their suit recyclers and the crunch of their boots on unseen debris. They finally reached what was marked as the station's primary xenophysics lab, headed by a Dr. Eris Thorne, a human scientist Varga recalled from the manifest. The lab door was buckled, but not locked. Inside, the devastation was more profound, but also strangely selective. Some equipment was untouched, while other pieces were twisted into impossible shapes or half-phased into the floor. And there, on a reinforced plasteel desk in a small, heavily shielded alcove that seemed to have better resisted the pervasive effects, was a datapad. Its screen was cracked, but a faint green light indicated it still held a charge. Helios picked it up, reverently. This section of the lab must have had enhanced dampening fields. Maybe it bought Thorne some time. She carefully interfaced the pad with her wrist computer. Fragmented logs, corrupted data streams, and desperate video snippets began to filter through Dr. Eris Thorne's face, gaunt and haunted, flickered onto Helios's display. Log entry, I don't even know the date. The experiment, the energy matrix, it attracted them. They're not from our dimensional strata. They exist across temporal states, simultaneously, chronosynclastic entities. His voice was hoarse, punctuated by static and strange whistling interference. Another fragment. They don't perceive us as we perceive them. Our solid matter is like a momentary ripple to them, but they're drawn to complex energy, life energy, technology. The station, it's become a resonant chamber. They're integrating. Varga watched, her gut clenching. Integrating? What does that mean? Helios scrolled through corrupted equations and diagrams. He was trying to find a way to disrupt their phase harmony. He theorized that their strength is their perfect synchronization across multiple temporal states. If you could hit them with a rapidly fluctuating multispectrum frequency, a kind of chaotic resonance or a sudden massive shock that knocks their different temporal aspects out of alignment. A final, desperate audio log from Thorne played, barely audible above the noise. The frequency cascade, almost had it. Need more power, more focus. They're not just passing through, they're consuming. Time itself, locally. Everything just unwinds. Oh God, they're in the walls. The log ended with a sharp crackle and then silence. Helios looked up from the pad, her face pale even in the gloom. Chronosynclastic entities. He called them chronomites in his earlier, less frantic notes. They don't just phase, Captain. They manipulate localized time. That's why the equipment is decaying, why things are phasing. They're causing micro-pockets of accelerated or desynchronized time. And they were drawn here by an experiment. And Thorne thought he could disrupt them? Varga asked. He was close, Helios said, tapping the data pad. He was working on a device to generate a focused, chaotic sonic and electromagnetic pulse. He believed if he could hit their collective consciousness, their synchronized state, with enough specifically patterned noise, he could force them to decohere. Become unstable, fall apart. Sonic? Varga's mind raced. Sparkplug, the Tusker has those old seismic resonance emitters, the ones we use for cracking asteroids. They're crude, but they put out a hell of a lot of multi-spectrum sonic energy. Helios's eyes widened. Yes, they're designed to induce structural failure through resonant frequencies. If we could modify one, combine it with what Thorne was theorizing, a focused kinetic shock to provide a point of impact, a seed for the desynchronization. A faint tremor ran through the station deck, a now familiar sensation of the PCS stirring nearby. Okay, Varga said decisively. We have Thorne's research, or what's left of it. We have a theory, and we have a very big, very loud sonic hammer back on the ship. Let's get the hell out of this ghost station and see if we can make some noise those chronosynclastic bastards will understand. The whispers from the wreckage had given them a desperate, improbable hope. The return journey to the Tusker was tense, the PCS seeming more agitated now, their shimmering forms pressing closer to the station's hull as if curious about the departing intruders. Back aboard their ship, Varga and Helios quickly shed their EVA suits, the oppressive silence of Aethelgard replaced by the familiar hum and thrum of their own vessel. Pathfinder status? Varga asked, already moving towards the small conference table where they'd often hashed out desperate plans over lukewarm calf. All quiet on the alien front, Captain, Gage replied. Valerius is still trying to send them love poems in binary, and Borak is probably polishing his favorite disruptor rifle. They've been asking for updates. Sounded like Valerius was about to have a fit of the shimmering vapors when we went EVA. Varga activated the comms to the Gliptian and Valkor vessels. Emissary Valerius, Commander Borak, we're back, and we have information. The faces of the Gliptian emissary and the Valkor commander appeared on screen. Valerius looking relieved but disapproving. Borak merely impatient. Varga laid out what they'd found. Dr. Thorne's research, the nature of the phasic crystalline swarm, the chronomites and their ability to manipulate localized time. She explained their attraction to Aethelgard's experimental energy source, and Thorne's desperate, unfinished theory about disrupting their phase synchronization. Valerius listened, the light patterns on his suit subtly shifting. Chronosynclastic, entities fascinating and terrifying. Your Dr. Thorne was clearly a scientist of considerable, if reckless, intellect. However, Captain, this data is fragmented, retrieved under extreme duress from a compromised source. To base a tactical decision upon such incomplete and likely corrupted information would be ill-advised. He paused, his chimes thoughtful. The Gliptian Science Council has previously theorized about the possibility of creating localized temporal nullification fields. It would be a slow process requiring immense energy and precise calibration, but it would theoretically create a zone where such entities could not maintain their unique state. Commander Borak snorted, a harsh, rasping sound. Nullification fields? We could be here for cycles, emissary, while these chronomites consolidate their hold or worse, spread. If this Thorne was onto something, a direct countermeasure is preferable. He looked at Varga, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. However, his solution sounds imprecise, dangerous. He then offered his own grim alternative. My recommendation, should your nullification field prove too slow, emissary, and this human theory too fanciful, is a strategic withdrawal. We call in the Valkor Armada. They will conduct a full sector purge. If the chronomites are anchored to this station, then the station, and indeed this entire sector of the nebula, must be sterilized with overwhelming firepower. Varga felt a chill. Sanitizing the sector won't guarantee you get them all, Commander, especially if they can slip between dimensions. And it means abandoning Aethelgard and any chance of understanding this phenomenon fully. It was Brenna Helios who spoke next, her voice passionate, urgent. Emissary Commander Dr. Thorne's research, combined with our own sensor logs from the Tusker's interaction with the chronomites, points to a more direct approach. He theorized that their shared synchronized temporal state is their greatest strength but also their greatest weakness. Like a perfectly tuned crystal, it's incredibly strong, but hit it with the right resonant frequency, and it shatters, She brought up a hastily sketched diagram on the shared display. We have salvage-grade seismic emitters on the Tusker. They're designed for fracturing asteroids using multi-spectrum sonic resonance. They're crude, powerful, and generate a chaotic, rapidly cycling wave pattern. If I can modify the primary emitter, override the safety governors, and focus the beam, and if we can deliver a significant, precisely timed kinetic shock to a dense concentration of the chronomites to act as a focal point, a seed for the desynchronization cascade, Thorn theorized. Valerius's chimes became agitated. Barbaric. You propose to use repurposed mining equipment as a weapon against entities that defy known physics? The energy backlash could be catastrophic. The uncontrolled frequencies could affect our own ships, our very molecular structure. It's a risk, Varga admitted coolly. But Dr. Thorne believed a rapidly fluctuating chaotic input was key. Our seismic emitter is nothing but chaotic input. Sparkplug can attest to that. Your nullification field, emissary, might be too ordered, too predictable. They might adapt. And Borak, your armada might just scatter them, or make them angrier. Borak's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. A kinetic shock? You mean a projectile? Fired into a swarm of phasing entities? We saw how well that worked earlier. Not a weaponized projectile, Commander, Helios clarified. Not something designed to explode or penetrate. Just something dense. Something to create a sudden, massive physical disruption in a localized area as the sonic frequencies hit. A disruption in their immediate space-time, forcing a momentary state of increased tangibility. For a fraction of them, making them vulnerable to the resonance. Thorne's notes called it seeding the dissonance. Valerius was aghast. This is not science, it is acoustic butchery. An act of profound desperation based on the ramblings of a doomed man and the reckless conjecture of humans. The final word was spoken with a distinct lack of melodic grace. Varga's jaw tightened. Maybe desperation is what we need, emissary. Because your elegant theories and Commander Borak's big fleet aren't going to get here in time if these things decide to expand their little temporal playground. We have the tools, we have a theory that fits the data we've gathered firsthand, and frankly, we're the only ones crazy enough to try it. She looked at her crew. Pathfinder gave a grim nod. Sparkplug's eyes shone with the manic light of an engineer about to push technology far beyond its intended limits. We're doing it, Varga stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. The Tusker will modify its seismic emitter. We'll need something for the kinetic impactor. Pathfinder, what's the densest piece of valuable salvage we have in cargo hold 3? Pathfinder grinned. That would be the petrified core of a Xantarian sludgeworm, Captain. About 5 tons of useless, super-dense rock. We were hoping to sell it as a garden ornament to some eccentric collector. Perfect, Varga said. Sparkplug, how long to modify the emitter and rig a delivery system for our garden ornament? Helios was already mentally disassembling and reassembling her equipment. Give me 3 hours to bypass the safeties, recalibrate the focusing array for maximum chaotic output, and jury-rig a magnetic harness for the worm rock. It'll be loud, ugly, and probably void our warranty, assuming we still had one. Valerius could only emit a series of discordant chimes. Borak watched the humans, his expression a mixture of profound skepticism and a warrior's reluctant acknowledgement of sheer, audacious nerve. You are proceeding with this plan without Concordiat authorization, Valerius finally managed. Varga met his gaze unflinchingly. We were ordered to ascertain the station's status, rescue survivors, and determine the cause of the silence. We're doing that. How we do it is our business, especially when the authorized methods are stalling. Consider this the unconventional means Coordinator Driscoll was so keen on. She cut the external comm feed, leaving the Gliptian and Valcor to their consternation. All right, you magnificent space orcs, Varga said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. Let's go build a weapon out of junk and hope. Just another day at the office. The Tusker's crew sprang into action, a well-oiled machine of focused, ingenious chaos. The 3 hours that followed were a blur of controlled mayhem aboard the Tusker. Brenna Helios, fueled by calf and sheer adrenaline, worked like a dervish in the guts of the primary seismic emitter, located in the forward belly of the ship. Sparks flew as she rerouted power conduits, her hands a blur as she soldered new connections and physically manhandled focusing coils into new, untested alignments. The air and engineering thickened with the scent of hot metal and ozone. Jorik Gage, meanwhile, was in Cargo Hold 3, wrestling the 5-ton, irregularly shaped Xantarian sludge worm core onto a repurposed cargo pallet, then painstakingly securing it within a makeshift magnetic harness designed to be released from the Tusker's main loading ramp. Captain Varga oversaw the entire operation, coordinating her small crew, her mind racing through contingencies. On the bridge, the external comms periodically crackled with Valerius's anxious inquiries and Borok's terse demands for status reports. Varga kept her replies brief and non-committal. Let them stew. Emitter modifications complete, Captain, Helios finally reported, her voice hoarse but triumphant, emerging from the access tunnel grime-streaked and grinning. She's ugly as a Nyxian bogwart, and the power draw is going to make the lights flicker something fierce. But she'll deliver a sonic punch that'll rattle the teeth of every ancestor these chronomites ever had. Theoretically. Kinetic impactor is secured and ready for deployment on your mark, Ram, Gage added from the cargo bay. Hope this oversized paperweight flies straight. Varga took a deep breath, settling into her command chair. All right, team, this is it. Pathfinder, take us in. I want a slow, steady approach towards the densest cluster of those PCS entities, the one near Aethelgard's main spire. Keep us just outside their immediate disruption range until we're ready to fire. Aye, Captain. Threading the needle, Gage acknowledged, his touch on the controls surprisingly delicate for such a rough-hewn man. The Tusker began to move, a blunt instrument preparing for a surprisingly precise if brutal operation. The Glyptian vessel Lumina and the Valkor warship Steel Talon maintained a wary distance, observing the Tusker's ponderous advance. On their bridge screens, the human ship, with its crude modifications and unorthodox payload, must have looked like the height of primitive desperation. Emissary Valerius to Tusker, came the inevitable worried chime. Captain Varga, your energy signature is fluctuating wildly. What is the status of your device? Device is warming up, Emissary, Varga replied calmly. Just enjoying the pre-show fireworks. Stand by for the main event. As the Tusker neared the designated coordinates, the air on the bridge grew thick with tension. The chronomite swarm pulsed and shimmered ahead, a silent, ethereal menace. Even through the hull, they could feel the subtle, disorienting pressure of the creature's proximity. We are in position, Captain, Gage announced, his knuckles white. Range to primary target cluster, 5 kilometers. Holding steady. For now. Helios, prepare to activate the emitter on my mark. Full power, chaotic cycle, just like we rehearsed in our nightmares, Varga ordered. Gage, prepare to release the impactor. We need it to hit the central mass of that cluster just as Sparky's music gets loud. Ready on the emitter. Helios called out, her fingers poised over a newly installed heavily shielded control panel that glowed an angry red. Impactor release sequence initiated, Gage confirmed. Mark, Varga commanded. With a heavy thunk that resonated through the ship, the magnetic harness released the Xantarian sludge worm core. The dense 5-ton rock tumbled slowly from the cargo bay, a crude, unguided missile launched into the heart of a dimensional anomaly. It moved with ponderous, unstoppable momentum. Impactor away, Gage shouted. Estimated time to target zone, 20 seconds. Helios, stand by. Varga watched the rock spin through the void. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hit it, Sparkplug. Brenna Helios slammed her palm down on the activation stud. The effect was instantaneous and visceral. The Tusker shuddered violently as the modified seismic emitter roared to life, not with a sound that could be heard in the vacuum of space, but with a colossal wave of multi-frequency sonic and subsonic energy that slammed outwards. The ship's lights dimmed drastically, then flickered back to a strained brightness. Alarms blared across the bridge as power levels surged and dipped erratically. On the main screen, the space around the Tusker's bow seemed to distort. to vibrate with an invisible monstrous force. Even on the Lumina and the Steel Talon, sensors went wild. "By the first axiom," Valerius exclaimed, his normally melodic chimes dissolving into horrified static. "The energy readings are off the scale. It's pure chaotic resonance." Commander Borok simply stared, his mandibles slightly agape. "They are actually doing it." As the first waves of the seismic assault reached the chronomite cluster, just as the dense Xantarian rock plunged into its midst, the reaction from the PCS was immediate and terrifying. The shimmering fields, normally ethereal and graceful, convulsed. They flashed with internal light, blues and violets and colors that had no name. Aethelgard Station, caught in the maelstrom, was racked with violent tremors, its ancient frame groaning in protest. Distortions ripped through the space around the station, making the stars themselves seem to bend and warp. The Tusker was caught in the backlash. Energy discharges, far more potent than before, hammered against its shields. Phasing waves washed over the hull, causing localized system failures and the sickening sensation of reality itself unraveling. The bridge lights died completely for a terrifying second, plunging them into emergency reds. "Shields are failing," Gage yelled, fighting the controls as the ship was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. We're losing atmospheric pressure." "Keep that emitter firing, Sparkplug." Varga roared over the cacophony, her hands gripping the command chair so tightly her knuckles were bone white. "Don't let up." "Not yet." Helios, strapped into her station, wrestled with the emitter controls. Feedback shrieked through her console, energy arcing from overloaded circuits. "She's fighting me, Captain. The chronomites, they're focusing on the emitter, trying to disrupt the frequency." Her face was a mask of sweat and concentration, illuminated by the erratic flashes from her board. "But it's working. Look." Through the chaos, through the storm of failing systems and violent spatial distortions, a change was occurring within the main chronomite cluster. The effect of the relentless, chaotic sonic barrage, anchored and amplified by the kinetic shockwave of the sludge-worm core tearing through their synchronized state, was becoming visible. The heart of the phasic crystalline swarm, where the Xantarian rock had impacted amidst the crescendo of the Tusker's chaotic sonic assault, became a focal point of utter pandemonium. The normally synchronized ethereal dance of the chronomites dissolved into a frenzied, discordant jig. Individual crystalline structures, no longer seamlessly part of the collective, began to flicker erratically, their phasing abilities failing. Instead of slipping between dimensions, they became momentarily jarringly solid, then would shimmer violently and shatter, not with an explosion, but with a silent, inward collapse, dissolving into motes of inert, harmless dust that caught the nebula's lurid light. The effect wasn't instantaneous across the entire swarm, but it spread outwards from the epicenter like a ripple of dissonance. The relentless, multi-frequency sonic waves, amplified and given a physical anchor by the kinetic impact, were indeed shattering their delicate chronosynclastic harmony. It was as if a perfectly tuned choir had suddenly been forced to sing 1,000 different, clashing songs at once, the resulting cacophony tearing them apart from within. Aethelgard Station, caught in the diminishing but still potent field, gave a final shuddering groan and then slowly began to stabilize. The eerie localized time distortions that had plagued its structure started to recede, like a fever breaking. Aboard the Tusker, the battle was far from over. The ship was a wreck. Alarms still shrieked, smoke filled the corridors from electrical fires, and the hull groaned under the strain of multiple breaches. But the violent energy discharges from the dissipating chronomite swarm were weakening, the disorienting phasing waves becoming less frequent. "Sparkplug, can you cut the emitter?" Varga yelled, her voice hoarse. The relentless bone-jarring thrum of the overloaded device was fading as its power cells finally gave out. Brenna Helios, slumped against her console, managed a weak thumbs up. She's done, Captain. Gave it everything she had. The focusing array is melted slag." A tired, triumphant grin spread across her soot-stained face. "But look at that. Just look at it." On the main view screen, now flickering back to life on auxiliary power, The vast, phasic, crystalline swarm was visibly disintegrating. The shimmering fields were tattered, fading, the individual entities shattering one by one, their strange light extinguished. Within minutes, where there had been a terrifying, dimension-bending anomaly, there was now only the swirling dust of the Nyxian Veil and the dark, silent form of Aethelgard research post, seemingly whole once more. A stunned silence descended upon the bridges of the Lumina and the Steel Talon. Their sophisticated sensors, which had been overwhelmed by the sheer chaotic energy of the human weapon, now registered the impossible. The chronomite threat was gone. Emissary Valerius was the first to break the silence, his chimes, though still carrying a trace of bewildered static, conveying utter astonishment. The entities. They are neutralized. The chronosynclastic field has collapsed. Captain Varga, your acoustic butchery. It appears to have worked. Commander Borok's response was a low, guttural rumble that, for once, held no discernible contempt. By the iron core of Valcor, I have never witnessed such a reckless and undeniably effective display of unconventional warfare. He paused, then gave a single sharp nod, a gesture of profound if grudging respect from a Valcor warrior. The humans, they fought with the spirit of a cornered Graxnarl. High praise, considering a Graxnarl was a notoriously ferocious, multi-jawed predator from his homeworld. Aboard the Tusker, the immediate crisis of the chronomites was replaced by the urgent crisis of survival. "Pathfinder, damage report," Varga barked, already unstrapping herself. Multiple hull breaches, mostly contained by emergency force fields, but were venting atmosphere in sectors 4, 5, and 7, Gage reported, his voice strained. Main drive is offline, running on maneuvering thrusters only. Shields are gone. Life support is struggling on reserve power. We're beat up, Captain, but we're still here. Good enough, Varga said. She looked at Helios. Sparky. Any chance of getting minimal life support restored to Aethelgard? If Thorn was right about them integrating the crew, maybe some are recoverable. Helios, already pulling up the station's schematics on a secondary console, nodded. Slowly. If the chronomites are gone, the temporal stasis effect might have preserved some of them. The station's primary fusion core is offline, but it has emergency backups. If we can reroute power. And so, the crew of the Tusker, battered and bruised, set about the next impossible task. With assistance reluctantly offered by a Glyptian engineering team, under Valerius's stunned supervision, and some surprisingly helpful heavy lifting provided by a Valcor shuttle, Borok seemed to consider the humans now worthy of at least basic battlefield courtesy. They managed to get Aethelgard's emergency power online. They found them in the shielded crew quarters and medical bays, nearly a dozen station personnel, including Dr. Eris Thorn himself, alive. They were unconscious, trapped in a state of phased temporal suspension, but alive. As the station's environment slowly normalized, they began to stir, confused and disoriented, but miraculously unharmed. Later, as the Tusker limped its way out of the Nyxian Veil, its hull patched with emergency sealants and its systems a chaotic mess of bypasses, Captain Varga stood on her bridge, looking at the receding nebula. Coordinator Driscoll had been informed. There would be inquiries, reports, probably a medal ceremony if they were lucky, or a court-martial if they weren't. Emissary Valerius had offered a formal, and this time genuinely odd commendation. Captain Varga, his chimes had resonated. Your crew's courage and unorthodox ingenuity have saved many lives and averted a crisis of unknown magnitude. The Glyptian Science Council will be studying your methods, however unconventional, with great interest. Commander Borok had simply said before the Steel Talon warped away, Human, you fight well. May your hull remain strong and your engines burn bright. Pathfinder nursed the Tusker's sputtering maneuvering thrusters. Sparkplug was already sketching out plans for a new, even more ridiculously overpowered seismic emitter. Just in case. Varga allowed herself a small, tired smile. They were still the space orcs of the galaxy, Their ship was a testament to controlled chaos, their methods questionable, their manners often deplorable. But today, the Orcs had faced down a reality-bending nightmare that had baffled the best and brightest, using grit, ingenuity, and a very loud noise. And they had won. The galaxy was a vast, strange place, and sometimes, Varga thought, it didn't need elegant equations or perfectly executed battle plans. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to hit the problem with a big enough rock and a whole lot of stubborn human noise. The echo of their disruption would, she suspected, ripple through the stars for a long time to come.